The golden light of dawn stretched across the dusty main street of Silver Creek, illuminating the lone figure of Thomas Garrett as he led his stallion toward the livery stable. His shoulders straight, despite the weariness that clung to him after 3 weeks on the trail. Women of all ages paused in their morning errands, eyes following his tall frame, hoping for just a glimpse of the smile that had become legendary throughout the Colorado Territory since his arrival 6 months prior. It was 1876, and Silver Creek was booming. The railroad had brought prosperity, and with it, a steady stream of hopeful settlers. Thomas had arrived with nothing but his horse, his guns, and a reputation as the fastest draw this side of the Mississippi. What no one had expected was the warmth of his smile, the kind that made even the most proper ladies flush with desire. Every unmarried woman in Silver Creek had set her cap for him, but Thomas remained politely distant, accepting dinner invitations only to decline marriage proposals with gentlemanly grace. What not a soul in Silver Creek knew was that Thomas Garrett's heart was already spoken for, though he'd never exchanged more than a dozen words with the woman who owned it. Delilah Bennett stood at the entrance of her small mercantile, sweeping the wooden porch with vigorous strokes. At 22, she was considered firmly on the shelf by most folks in town. Not because she lacked beauty, her chestnut hair and clear green eyes had drawn plenty of suitors, but because she'd made it clear that the store her late father had left her was her priority. The mercantile was her life, her independence, and she guarded it fiercely. She glanced up just as Thomas passed by, their eyes meeting for the briefest moment. His smile, usually so generous with others, transformed into something different, softer, more genuine, tinged with a shyness that made Delilah's heart stutter in her chest. She nodded slightly in acknowledgement, then ducked her head, resuming her sweeping with renewed vigor, hoping he hadn't noticed the blush that had crept up her neck. Thomas tipped his hat to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Morning, Miss Bennett, Mr. Garrett," she replied, not looking up from her task. "Welcome back to Silver Creek." He paused, looking as if he might say more, but the moment was broken by the arrival of Josephine Edwards, the mayor's daughter, who rushed toward Thomas with an enthusiasm that bordered on impropriety. "Mr. Garrett, oh, you've returned. Mother and I were just saying at breakfast how we hoped you'd join us for supper tonight. Father has some business proposition to discuss with you." Thomas stepped back slightly, maintaining a respectful distance. "Miss Edwards, good morning to you. I'm afraid I've just returned from a long drive. Perhaps another time." Josephine pouted prettily, batting her eyelashes. "But we've been planning this dinner for ages, Mr. Garrett. Surely you can spare one evening." Delilah kept her eyes fixed on her sweeping, but her ears caught every word. She'd witnessed this scene dozens of times, Thomas being pursued, Thomas gently declining. It shouldn't interest her, and yet it did. "I'm sorry, Miss Edwards," Thomas said firmly. "My first priority is seeing to my horse and getting some rest. Please extend my apologies to your parents." With that, he tipped his hat once more and continued toward the livery, leaving a disappointed Josephine in his wake. As he walked away, he cast one last glance over his shoulder, not at Josephine, but at Delilah. She pretended not to notice, but her heart beat a little faster. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Delilah organized the new shipment of goods that had arrived on the morning train. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see Mrs. Whitaker, the banker's wife, entering with her usual air of importance. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitaker." "What can I help you with today?" Delilah asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just some thread, dear, and perhaps some information." Mrs. Whitaker's eyes gleamed with curiosity as she approached the counter. "I saw Thomas Garrett is back in town. Such a handsome man, don't you think?" Delilah kept her expression neutral. "I suppose many ladies find him so." "Many ladies? My dear, every unmarried woman in Silver Creek is positively beside herself whenever he's in town." Mrs. Whitaker leaned closer. "They say he turned down Josephine Edwards again this morning. Can you imagine? The mayor's daughter, and she's not the first. He's refused invitations from the Hendersons, the Clarks, even the widow Johnson, and she's quite wealthy." Delilah reached beneath the counter for the spools of thread. "What color would you like, Mrs. Whitaker?" "Blue, please." To match my new dress for the Founders' Day dance. Mrs. Whittaker accepted the thread but wasn't done with her gossip. They say he must have a sweetheart somewhere else, perhaps back east, or maybe he's running from something, a man that handsome with no interest in settling down. It's not natural. That will be 15 cents, please. Delilah held out her hand for payment. Mrs. Whittaker placed the coins in her palm. You know, Delilah, you're not getting any younger. 22 is practically spinsterhood in these parts. You should come to the dance. The Peterson boy has been asking about you. Delilah forced a smile. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Whittaker, but the store keeps me busy. All work and no play, dear. It's not healthy. With those parting words, Mrs. Whittaker swept out of the store, the bell jingling in her wake. Delilah sighed, returning to her inventory. She'd long ago resigned herself to the fact that Silver Creek saw her as the spinster shopkeeper. It was easier that way. No one needed to know about the dreams that kept her awake at night, dreams of a different life, a life where she could have both her independence and... The bell jingled again, and Delilah looked up, her practiced customer service smile freezing on her face when she saw Thomas Garrett standing in her doorway. He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of burnished gold. Miss Bennett, Mr. Garrett. She straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. What can I do for you today? He stepped further into the store, his spurs making a gentle jingling sound against the wooden floor. I'm in need of supplies, been on the trail for 3 weeks, of course. She moved to the shelves behind the counter. Coffee, beans, salt, all of those. He approached the counter, his movements measured and calm. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of long days under the sun. And perhaps some of that raspberry preserves you carry. If you still have it, Delilah paused, surprised. You remember that I stock raspberry preserves? A ghost of that special smile appeared on his face. Best I've ever tasted, reminded me of home. She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Where is home, Mr. Garrett, if you don't mind my asking? He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. Tennessee originally, though I haven't been back in 10 years. A long time to be away from home. She gathered the items he'd requested, carefully wrapping the jar of preserves in paper. Home isn't always a place, he said quietly. Then, as if regretting the personal nature of his comment, he straightened. I'll need some ammunition as well, .44 caliber. Delilah nodded, retrieving a box from beneath the counter. As she set it down, their fingers brushed momentarily. The brief contact sent a jolt through her that she hoped didn't show on her face. Will there be anything else? She asked, her voice impressively steady. Thomas hesitated, looking as if he wanted to say something more, but instead shook his head. No, that'll do for now. Thank you, Miss Bennett. She totaled his purchases. That comes to $2.35. He placed the exact amount on the counter, then gathered his supplies. At the door, he paused, turning back to her. Miss Bennett. Yes, Mr. Garrett. I was wondering if you might be attending the Founders' Day dance next weekend. The question caught her so off guard that she couldn't hide her surprise. I hadn't planned on it, no. Was that disappointment that flickered across his face? I see. Well, good day to you then. Good day, Mr. Garrett. The bell jingled as he left, and Delilah found herself staring at the closed door long after he'd gone, wondering if she'd imagined the entire exchange. The next few days passed in a blur of customers and inventory. Delilah did her best to push thoughts of Thomas Garrett from her mind, but it proved increasingly difficult. Every time the bell above her door jingled, she found herself looking up expectantly, only to hide her disappointment when it was someone else. On Thursday afternoon, as Delilah was closing up shop, her closest friend in Silver Creek, Maria Rodriguez, burst through the door, her dark eyes sparkling with excitement. Delilah Bennett, why didn't you tell me? Maria demanded, hands on her hips. Delilah blinked in confusion. Tell you what? About Thomas Garrett, Maria exclaimed, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The whole town is talking about it. A cold dread settled in Delilah's stomach. Talking about what exactly? Maria grabbed her hands. About how he's been asking questions about you. First to my father at the livery, then to Sheriff Collins, and even to old Mrs. Peterson at the bakery. He wants to know everything about you, how long you've been running the store, whether you have family elsewhere if you're. Maria wiggled her eyebrows suggestively, spoken for. Delilah sank onto a nearby stool, her mind racing. That can't be right. Mr. Garrett hardly knows me. Well, it seems he wants to change that. Maria sat beside her, her expression softening. Delilah, this is Thomas Garrett we're talking about. The man every woman in Silver Creek would give her eideth to court, and he's interested in you. There must be some mistake, Delilah insisted, though a small, hopeful part of her wondered if it could be true. Perhaps he's just being neighborly, Maria snorted. Neighborly doesn't involve asking Sheriff Collins if you've ever been in trouble with the law. He did what? Delilah exclaimed, horrified. Relax, Maria laughed. The sheriff told him you're the most law-abiding citizen in the territory, but don't you see? He's investigating you like you're some kind of mystery he wants to solve. Delilah shook her head, unwilling to let hope take root. Even if that were true, which I doubt, what could a man like Thomas Garrett possibly want with me? He could have any woman in town. Maria's expression grew serious. Maybe that's exactly why he's interested in you, because you're the only woman who hasn't been throwing herself at him since the day he arrived. The thought lingered with Delilah long after Maria had gone. That night, as she lay in bed in her small apartment above the store, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if Thomas Garrett truly was interested in her. The fantasy was both thrilling and terrifying. She'd heard stories about him, that he'd been a lawman once, that he'd run with outlaws, that he'd been hired by wealthy ranchers to protect their interests. No one seemed to know the truth, and Thomas himself never spoke of his past. All anyone knew for certain was that he was fast with a gun and kind to those in need. Delilah rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket up to her chin. It didn't matter anyway. Men like Thomas Garrett didn't settle down with plain shopkeepers. Eventually, he'd move on from Silver Creek, just as he'd apparently moved on from countless towns before. And she would still be here, minding her store, living the life she'd chosen. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, she couldn't help but remember the way his smile changed when he looked at her, softer, more genuine, as if reserved for her alone. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, promising another scorching summer day. Delilah had just unlocked the front door of the Mercantile when Sheriff Collins appeared on her porch, his weathered face serious. "Morning, Miss Bennett," he said, removing his hat. "Got a moment to talk?" Delilah's heart raced. Had something happened to Thomas? "Of course, Sheriff." "Please come in." The sheriff stepped inside, glancing around the empty store before speaking. "I wanted to give you some warning, Miss Bennett. There's trouble brewing." "What kind of trouble?" she asked, relief that it wasn't about Thomas quickly replaced by new concern. "The Reeves gang has been spotted near Silver Springs. Word is they're headed this way." The Reeves gang. Even in a territory accustomed to outlaws, that name struck fear. Led by the notorious Jedediah Reeves, they terrorized Colorado for years, robbing banks, burning homesteads, leaving no witnesses. "Why are they coming here?" Delilah asked, her mouth suddenly dry. Sheriff Collins sighed heavily. "Train's bringing in the Army payroll tomorrow. $30,000. We've kept it quiet, but somehow word got out. Can't the train be delayed?" "Already tried. Military says they can't change the schedule." The sheriff adjusted his gun belt. "I've deputized some men and will be ready, but I wanted to warn you personally. The bank's right across from your store. If there's shooting—" "I understand," Delilah said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Thank you for telling me." Sheriff Collins nodded, replacing his hat. "Might be nothing comes of it. But if you hear gunfire tomorrow, you get down on the floor and stay there. Don't try to be brave." After he left, Delilah stood motionless in the middle of her store, trying to calm her racing heart. The Reeves gang, here in Silver Creek. The thought was terrifying. The bell jingled, startling her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Thomas Garrett entering, his expression serious. "Miss Bennett," he said, closing the door behind him. "I assume Sheriff Collins has already spoken with you," she nodded, finding her voice. "About the Reeves gang, yes." Thomas moved closer, his voice dropping. "I want you to close the store tomorrow. Stay in your apartment upstairs, away from the windows." "I can't just close," she protested. Saturday is my busiest day, and besides, the sheriff said they might not even come. They'll come, Thomas said with a certainty that sent a chill down her spine. I know Jedediah Reeves. If he's heard about that payroll, wild horses couldn't keep him away. Delilah studied his face, noting the hardness that had replaced his usual warmth. You know him. How? Thomas hesitated, then sighed. We rode together, years ago before he became what he is now. The revelation stunned her. Thomas Garrett, an outlaw, you were part of his gang? No, Thomas said quickly. We were both hired guns for the Carlisle Ranch during the range wars. Different paths after that. I chose the right side of the law, he didn't. Relief washed over her, followed by curiosity. Is that why you came to Silver Creek? You knew about the payroll? No, I came here for. He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. That's not important now. What matters is keeping you safe. Jedediah doesn't leave witnesses, Delilah. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and despite the dire circumstances, her heart fluttered at the sound of it on his lips. I can't hide while everyone else in town is in danger, she insisted. This store was my father's legacy. I won't abandon it. Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Your father wouldn't want you to die for a building, Delilah. It's not just a building, she shot back. It's my life, everything I've worked for. They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. Fine, if you won't leave, then I'll stay with you. What? Tomorrow, I'll be here in the store. If Reeves and his men come, I'll make sure you're protected. Delilah shook her head. The sheriff will need you. You just said yourself that you know Reeves. The sheriff has his deputies. My priority is keeping you safe. His voice left no room for argument, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. Why? She whispered. Why me? For a moment, Thomas looked vulnerable, uncertain. Then, as if making a decision, he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather of his vest and the faint scent of soap. Because from the moment I rode into Silver Creek and saw you standing on this porch, sweeping away the morning dust with such determination in your eyes, I knew you were different. His voice was low, almost reverent. 6 months I've been coming to this store, buying things I didn't need, just to exchange a few words with you. 6 months of watching every other woman in town throw herself at me, while the only one I wanted to notice me barely looked my way. Delilah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. I noticed, she admitted softly. I always noticed. A smile, that special, soft smile that made her knees weak, spread across his face. Then let me protect you tomorrow, please. She nodded, unable to find words, overwhelmed by the realization that the feelings she'd been harboring weren't one-sided after all. Thomas reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'll be here at dawn, he promised. Lock the door behind me when I leave now. Don't open it for anyone you don't know. I won't, she assured him. He lingered a moment longer, looking as if he wanted to say more to do more, but then stepped back. Until tomorrow, then. Delilah watched him go, her mind spinning with the morning's revelations. Thomas Garrett cared for her, had been watching her, noticing her for months. And tomorrow they would face danger together. Sleep eluded Delilah that night. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with images of gunfire and blood, interspersed with memories of Thomas's confession, the gentle touch of his fingers against her cheek. By the time dawn broke, she was exhausted but alert, her nerves stretched taut as piano wire. She dressed carefully in a simple blue dress, her movements methodical, trying to calm the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. As promised, Thomas arrived just as the first rays of sunlight touched the dusty street. She let him in quickly, locking the door behind him. He looked different today. Gone was the friendly cowboy who charmed the ladies of Silver Creek. In his place stood a hardened gunslinger, 2 Colt revolvers holstered at his hips, a Winchester rifle in his hands. His eyes scanned the store with a professional assessment. We'll move the counter, he said without preamble. Create a barrier in case they get inside. Together, they rearranged the furniture, creating a makeshift fortress in the corner furthest from the windows. Thomas positioned himself so he could see both the front door and the street through the windows. The payroll arrives at noon, he explained. If Reeves is going to make his move, it'll be then. Delilah nodded, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she arranged some of her stock behind their barricade. "What will happen if they come?" Thomas's expression was grim. "Sheriff Collins and his deputies will try to stop them. There'll be shooting." He looked directly at her. "When it starts, you get down and stay down. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens to me, you stay hidden until it's over." "Until it's over," she repeated, the implication of his words sinking in. "Thomas, I can't just let you. You can and you will," he said firmly. Then his voice softening, "I've spent my life making bad choices, Delilah, letting the wrong people influence me, running when I should have stood my ground. For once, I want to do something right, something that matters." "You matter," she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm. "To me." His eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't quite name. He covered her hand with his own, his touch sending warmth through her despite the fear knotting her stomach. "Then that's one more reason to make sure we both survive this day." The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Delilah kept the closed sign on the door but lit the lamps inside so anyone passing would know they were there. By mid-morning, the town had taken on an eerie stillness. Most businesses remained shuttered, the streets nearly empty save for Sheriff Collins and his deputies positioned strategically along Main Street. "They're coming," Thomas said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the window. "Riders approaching from the east." Delilah moved to look, but Thomas pulled her back. "Stay away from the windows." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she strained to hear. After a moment, the distant thunder of hoofbeats reached her ears. "Many horses, riding hard. How many?" she whispered. "At least 10, Thomas replied, checking his weapons one last time. More than Collins was expecting. The sound grew louder and then shouts erupted from outside. Sheriff Collins's voice commanding the riders to halt. Other voices, unfamiliar and threatening. "Get down," Thomas ordered, positioning himself at the edge of their barricade. Now, Delilah, she had just dropped to her knees when the first shots rang out. The window shattered, sending glass flying across the store. Delilah bit back a scream, pressing herself against the floor as bullets splintered wood and punched through the walls around her. Thomas returned fire, the sound deafening in the confined space. Outside, chaos reigned, men shouting, horses screaming, gunfire seemingly coming from every direction. "Stay down," Thomas yelled over the cacophony. Delilah huddled behind the counter, her hands over her ears, prayer after prayer falling from her lips. She'd known danger before. Life on the frontier had never been safe, but nothing like this. Nothing like the methodical destruction of her store, her sanctuary. A moment of relative quiet fell, broken by a voice calling from outside. "Garrett, Thomas Garrett, I know you're in there." Thomas tensed, his face hardening. "Reeves," he muttered. "Come out, Garrett," the voice continued. "Or we burn the place with you in it." Thomas glanced at Delilah, indecision warring in his eyes. "If I go out there?" "No," she whispered fiercely, grabbing his arm. "You said yourself he doesn't leave witnesses. He'll kill you and then come for me anyway." "Your lady friend's got a point, Garrett," Reeves called, as if he'd heard them. "But maybe we can make a deal. You've got something I want, I've got something you want." "What's he talking about?" Delilah asked, confused. Thomas's expression grew troubled. "I don't know." A new voice cut through the air, female, terrified, familiar. "Delilah, help me." Delilah's blood ran cold. "Maria," she gasped. "They have Maria." Thomas's grip tightened on his rifle. "It's a trick. They're trying to draw us out. Please." Maria's voice again, breaking on a sob. "They're going to kill me." Delilah's eyes filled with tears. "We can't let them hurt her. She's innocent in all this." "No one's innocent in Jedediah's eyes," Thomas said grimly. "But you're right, we can't leave her to him." He took a deep breath, his decision made. "I'm going out." "No." Delilah clutched at him. "He'll kill you." "Not right away." Thomas holstered one of his revolvers but kept the other in hand. "He'll want to talk first, make a show of it. That'll give Sheriff Collins and his men time to regroup, maybe flank them." He looked down at her, his eyes softening. "I need you to stay here, hidden. If I can get Maria free, I'll send her to you. Barricade the door behind her." "And what about you?" Delilah couldn't stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks. Thomas cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb gently wiping away a tear. "I'll come back to you, I promise." Before she could protest further, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, desperate kiss that tasted of gunpowder and unspoken promises. Then he was gone, moving toward the shattered front window. "I'm coming out, Reeves," he called. "Don't hurt the girl." Delilah watched in horror as Thomas climbed through the broken window, hands raised, his revolver dangling harmlessly from one finger. From her position, she could just see a group of men on horseback in the street, one of them holding a struggling Maria in front of him. "Well, well," a drawling voice that must belong to Jedediah Reeves carried clearly through the broken window. "Thomas Garrett, been a long time." "Let the girl go, Jedediah," Thomas said calmly. "She's not part of this." "Part of what, exactly?" Reeves laughed, a cold sound that sent shivers down Delilah's spine. "The $10,000 you stole from me in Durango, or maybe you mean the bullet you put in my brother's back." Delilah's breath caught. What was Reeves talking about? "Your brother drew on me first," Thomas replied. "And that money wasn't yours to begin with. You'd stolen it from the orphanage fund." "Always the righteous one," Reeves sneered. "Even when you were riding with us, you had to pretend you were better than the rest of us." There was a pause then. "Drop the gun, Thomas, all of them." Delilah watched as Thomas carefully placed his revolver on the ground, then removed his second gun and the rifle, laying them down as well. "Now," Reeves continued, "you're going to tell me where you hid that money, or I'm going to put a bullet in this pretty señorita's head." "Don't tell him anything," Maria cried, earning herself a rough shake from her captor. Delilah's mind raced. Money hidden in Silver Creek. Was that why Thomas had come here? Had everything he'd told her been a lie? "The money's gone, Jedediah," Thomas said. "I gave it back to the orphanage." "Every cent." A tense silence followed his words. Then Reeves laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. "You really expect me to believe that? You, the famous gun for hire, turned it all over out of the goodness of your heart. Believe what you want, it's the truth." "Well then," Reeves's voice hardened, "I guess the girl dies." "Wait," Thomas shouted. "Take me instead, let her go and I'll go with you. You can take your time getting your revenge." Delilah's heart hammered painfully. She couldn't let this happen. She wouldn't sit by while Thomas sacrificed himself. Her eyes fell on the shotgun Thomas had placed behind the counter earlier. With shaking hands, she reached for it. Outside, Reeves seemed to be considering Thomas's offer. "You always were a sentimental fool, Thomas. But I admit the idea of watching you suffer has its appeal." "Then we have a deal," Thomas pressed. "The girl goes free, I suppose," Reeves began, but his words were cut off by a new round of gunfire, not from the outlaws or Thomas, but from the rooftops and alleyways around them. Sheriff Collins and his deputies had repositioned themselves during the standoff. Now they opened fire from elevated positions, catching the Reeves gang in a deadly crossfire. Chaos erupted once more. Delilah heard Maria scream, then saw her break free from her captor as he tumbled from his horse, felled by a deputy's bullet. Thomas dove for his discarded weapons, rolling to avoid the shots aimed his way. Delilah clutched the shotgun to her chest, paralyzed with fear as the battle raged outside. She should stay hidden as Thomas had ordered, but every instinct screamed for her to help, to do something. Her decision was made for her when the back door of the store suddenly burst open. Two of Reeves's men had circled around, seeking shelter from the deputy's fire. They froze momentarily when they saw Delilah crouched behind the counter, shotgun in hand. Time seemed to slow as one of the men raised his pistol toward her. Without conscious thought, Delilah pulled both triggers of the shotgun. The recoil slammed her backward, but her aim was true. The outlaw dropped, his companion diving behind a shelf for cover. "Delilah." Thomas's voice came from the front of the store. He must have heard the shotgun blast. "Back here," she called, frantically trying to reload with trembling fingers. Before she could manage it, the second outlaw lunged toward her, knife drawn. Delilah scrambled backward, but her skirts tangled around her legs. She fell, the empty shotgun clattering away from her grasp. The outlaw loomed above her, his face twisted in a vicious grin. "Nowhere to run now, missy," he growled, raising the knife. A shot rang out, and the outlaw's expression changed to one of surprise, then emptiness. He crumpled to the floor beside Delilah, revealing Thomas standing in the doorway, revolver still smoking in his hand. Their eyes met across the room, relief washing over Thomas's features. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, striding toward her. "No," she managed, her voice shaking. "You? I'm fine." He helped her to her feet, his hands running over her arms as if to assure himself she was truly unharmed. "Reeves is down. Sheriff Collins got him. It's over." The words took a moment to sink in. Over, they had survived. Delilah sagged against Thomas, the adrenaline that had kept her upright suddenly abandoning her. He caught her easily, cradling her against his chest. "You saved my life," she whispered. "And you saved mine," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "That shotgun blast distracted Reeves just as he was taking aim at me." Delilah looked up at him, questions burning in her eyes. The money he was talking about, the orphanage, was that true? Thomas sighed, helping her to a chair that had somehow remained upright during the chaos. "Yes, all of it. I rode with Reeves for a short time years ago. I was young, angry, looking for somewhere to belong. But when they raided that orphanage in Durango, took every cent those children had." He shook his head. "I couldn't be part of that. I took the money while they were celebrating, returned it, then fled. Been running from them ever since. And that's why you came to Silver Creek. You were still running." The thought brought an unexpected pain to Delilah's heart. "At first," Thomas admitted, "but then I saw you and I stopped wanting to run." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and honest. "For the first time in my life, I found someone worth staying for." The confession hung between them, weighted with possibility. Before Delilah could respond, however, footsteps and voices approached the store. Sheriff Collins appeared in the doorway, Maria beside him, her face tear-stained but relieved. "Delilah," Maria cried, rushing forward to embrace her friend. "Thank God you're safe." The sheriff surveyed the scene, his weathered face solemn. "Reeves is dead along with 5 of his men. The rest have surrendered." His eyes moved to the 2 dead outlaws on the floor of Delilah's store. "I see you handled things in here, Mr. Garrett saved my life," Delilah said, still trying to process everything that had happened. "And Miss Bennett saved mine," Thomas added, his hand coming to rest protectively on her shoulder. Sheriff Collins nodded, a knowing look passing between the men. "Army payroll's safe. Train never even made it to the station. We got word to them about the gang and they diverted to Fort Collins instead." He sighed, looking around at the destruction. "Town's got some rebuilding to do, though." Delilah followed his gaze, taking in the shattered windows, splintered shelves, and merchandise scattered across the floor of her beloved store. Months of work destroyed in minutes. The weight of it threatened to crush her. "We'll help you rebuild, Delilah," Maria promised, squeezing her hand. "Everyone will, you'll see." "The town takes care of its own," Sheriff Collins agreed, "and after what happened here today, there's not a soul in Silver Creek who wouldn't lend a hand." Thomas's grip on her shoulder tightened slightly. "If you'll allow it, Miss Bennett, I'd like to be the first to offer my services in rebuilding your store." The formal address wasn't lost on Delilah, nor on the others present. Thomas was giving her a choice, publicly acknowledging that whatever had passed between them during the danger, she had the right to define what happened next. Delilah looked up at him, at the man who had been willing to sacrifice himself for a town that knew nothing of his past, for a woman he'd barely spoken to in 6 months of careful glances and reserved smiles. In that moment, her decision was made. "I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Garrett," she said softly, her own hand rising to cover his where it rested on her shoulder. "Very much indeed." The days following the shootout were a blur of activity. True to Sheriff Collins's prediction, the entire town rallied around Delilah, helping to clear the debris, repair the damage, and restore her mercantile. Thomas worked tirelessly alongside them, often staying long after others had gone home for the day. A week after the attack, as the sun was setting on another long day of repairs, Delilah found herself alone with Thomas in the nearly restored store. They had fallen into an easy companionship during the rebuilding, but neither had spoken of the kiss they'd shared in the heat of battle, nor of Thomas's confession about his feelings for her. Delilah watched him as he secured the new front window, his movements precise and confident. He looked different, somehow more settled, less like a man ready to ride out at a moment's notice. "The store looks better than before," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Thomas turned to her with a smile, that special smile that still made her heart skip. "It does, though I think Mrs. Whitaker is disappointed you didn't take her suggestion to add a ladies' hat section, Delilah laughed. One battle at a time, I think. He set down his tools, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached her. Speaking of battles, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. Her pulse quickened. Oh, Sheriff Collins offered me a job as his deputy. The news surprised her. A deputy, I thought, with your past. He knows about my past, Thomas said quietly. I told him everything after the shootout. Said he'd rather have a man who knows what he's fighting against than someone who's never faced true darkness. He paused, uncertain. It would mean staying in Silver Creek, permanently. Hope bloomed in Delilah's chest, but she tempered it with caution. Is that what you want, to stay? Thomas took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. What I want, he said slowly, deliberately, is to wake up every morning knowing I'll see you, to earn the right to court you properly if you'll allow it. To build something real here, something honest for the first time in my life. Delilah's breath caught in her throat. Thomas, I know it's sudden, he continued, his voice gaining urgency. I know we barely know each other despite these months of watching from afar. And I know my past is complicated, but when I thought I might lose you in that gunfight, I realized I couldn't wait any longer to tell you how I feel. He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. I love you, Delilah Bennett. I think I've loved you since that first morning I saw you sweeping your porch, looking like the sunrise itself in your yellow dress. Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. I was wearing blue, she whispered. Thomas blinked, then laughed softly. See, I still have much to learn about you. And I want to learn everything your favorite color, how you take your tea, what makes you laugh, what makes you cry. I want to earn your trust and maybe, someday, your love. Delilah squeezed his hands, her heart so full it felt it might burst. You already have it, my trust and my love. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. I've loved you too, Thomas, even when I told myself it was foolish, even when every other woman in town was vying for your attention. I never saw them, he said simply, only you. This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, there was no desperation, no fear of impending death. Just tenderness, promise, and the sweet certainty of a future unfolding before them. The Founders' Day dance, postponed due to the attack but not canceled, took place 2 weeks later in the newly built town hall. Delilah entered on Thomas's arm, wearing a dress of deep green that she'd secretly ordered from Denver for the occasion. A collective murmur swept through the crowd as they appeared Silver Creek's most eligible bachelor and the shopkeeper who had captured his heart when every other woman had failed. Everyone's staring, Delilah whispered, suddenly self-conscious. Let them, Thomas replied, his hand warm against the small of her back. They're just jealous that I get to dance with the prettiest woman in the room. Josephine Edwards approached, her smile tight but polite. Deputy Garrett, she said, acknowledging his new position. Miss Bennett. How lovely to see you both. Miss Edwards, Thomas nodded. You look very nice this evening. Thank you, she glanced between them, her curiosity evident. I must say you two have become the talk of the town, such a unexpected pairing. The best things in life often are unexpected, wouldn't you agree? Thomas replied smoothly, his hand tightening slightly on Delilah's waist. Josephine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Indeed. Well, do enjoy the dance. She moved away, immediately engaging the banker's son in conversation. That wasn't so bad, Delilah murmured. The worst is over, I think, Thomas said, guiding her toward the dance floor. Once they realized I wasn't just helping you rebuild out of guilt or charity, the matchmaking mamas of Silver Creek had to accept defeat. The music swelled, a waltz that had couples forming around them. Thomas turned to face Delilah, one hand taking hers, the other settling at her waist. May I have this dance, Miss Bennett? You may, Deputy Garrett, she replied, her cheeks flushing with pleasure. As they moved together across the dance floor, Delilah marveled at how right it felt to be in his arms, how perfectly they seemed to fit together. The stares of the townspeople faded away, until it felt as though they were the only two people in the room. You're a surprisingly good dancer, she noted as he guided her through a turn. My mother insisted on lessons back in Tennessee, he admitted with a grin. Said no son of hers was going to stomp on some poor girl's toes at a social. I'll have to thank her someday, Delilah said without thinking, then blushed as she realized the implication of her words. Thomas's eyes darkened with emotion. I'd like that. For you to meet her, I mean, she'd love you, I think. You haven't seen her in 10 years, you said. I write to her. Not as often as I should, but she knows I'm alive. He executed another perfect turn. I sent her a letter last week, actually, told her about you, about the deputy position, about how I'm finally stopping my wandering ways. The thought of Thomas sharing her with his family, making plans for a future that included her, filled Delilah with a joy so intense it almost hurt. I'd like to meet her too, she whispered. As the waltz ended, Thomas surprised her by not releasing her hand. Instead, he led her through the crowd toward the doors that opened onto the balcony. The night air was cool against her flushed skin as they stepped outside, the sounds of the dance muffled behind them. The stars scattered across the Colorado sky like diamonds on black velvet, the crescent moon casting just enough light to see by. Thomas guided her to the railing, but instead of releasing her, he kept her hand in his. I had a whole speech planned, he said, his voice low and slightly unsteady. Words I've been practicing for days, but now that we're here, I find I can't remember any of it. Delilah's heart began to race. Thomas, he took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. Delilah Bennett, I know it hasn't been long. I know some might say we're rushing, but when you've spent your life running, you recognize the moment when you've finally found home. He reached into his pocket with his free hand, withdrawing a small ring. I'm not a wealthy man. This was my grandmother's. My mother sent it when I wrote to her about you. But if you'll have me, if you'll let me stand beside you for all the days to come, I promise to love you with everything I am. Tears blurred Delilah's vision as he continued. Will you marry me, Delilah? Will you make a wandering cowboy the happiest man alive? For a moment she couldn't speak, overcome with emotion. Then, finally finding her voice, she whispered, Yes, yes, Thomas, I will marry you. His smile, that special smile that had always been reserved for her alone, lit up his face as he slid the ring onto her finger. It was a simple gold band with a small pearl, nothing ostentatious, but to Delilah, it was more precious than all the diamonds in the world. Thomas rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Delilah Bennett, soon to be Delilah Garrett. I love you too, she replied, her heart so full it threatened to overflow. My cowboy, my home. The news of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. By the following morning, there wasn't a soul in town who hadn't heard that Thomas Garrett, the man whose smile had captured the imagination of every unmarried woman for miles around, had given his heart to the quiet shopkeeper who had never joined the chase. Some expressed surprise, others claimed they'd seen it coming all along, but all agreed on one thing. The way Thomas looked at Delilah with that soft, tender glance he reserved for her alone told the whole story. It was the look of a man who had found, at last, the one thing he'd been searching for his entire life. And Delilah, who had once resigned herself to a life of independence without love, discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you open your door to find a handsome cowboy with a smile meant only for you. Their wedding took place in Silver Creek's small church on a crisp autumn day, 3 months after the proposal. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the church so packed that latecomers had to stand in the back. Thomas waited at the altar, more nervous than he'd ever been facing down outlaws, but when the doors opened and Delilah appeared in a gown of ivory lace, his nervousness transformed into utter certainty. She walked toward him, radiant in her happiness, and Thomas knew without a doubt that every step of his difficult journey had led him exactly where he was meant to be. As they exchanged vows before God and their community, Thomas promised to cherish her all the days of his life, a promise he intended to keep with every breath in his body. The years that followed brought changes to Silver Creek. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers, more businesses. The Garrett Mercantile, as it came to be known, prospered under the joint management of Delilah and Thomas, who balanced his deputy duties with helping in the store. They added a ladies' hat section after all, much to Mrs. Whittaker's satisfaction. Thomas's mother came to visit the spring after their wedding, staying for 3 months and developing such a bond with Delilah that parting was difficult for them both. She returned to Tennessee with promises to come back for the birth of her first grandchild, a promise she kept when Delilah delivered a healthy baby boy they named James, after Delilah's father, just over a year after their wedding. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, Elizabeth, named for Thomas's mother. The children grew strong and happy, surrounded by the love of their parents and the entire community that had witnessed their parents' unusual courtship. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Delilah by closing the store early and taking her for a ride outside town. They stopped at a beautiful spot overlooking the valley, where Thomas had prepared a picnic. As they sat together, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Delilah leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The wandering, the adventure." Thomas wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Not for a single moment," he replied honestly. "Everything I've ever wanted is right here." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, raising 2 children with you is adventure enough." Delilah laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "True. I caught James trying to teach Elizabeth how to use your old revolver yesterday." "He what?" Thomas exclaimed, sitting up straight. "Don't worry, it wasn't loaded. And I explained that 6-year-olds aren't allowed to handle firearms, no matter how much they want to be like their papa." Thomas relaxed, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "That boy is going to turn my hair gray before I'm 40. I think you'll look very distinguished with gray hair," Delilah teased, reaching up to run her fingers through his still golden locks. "Very handsome sheriff material." "Sheriff, huh?" "Collins mentioned retiring next year. And everyone knows you're the obvious choice to replace him," Delilah said. "The town trusts you, Thomas. They've long since forgotten any rumors about your past. They see you as you are now, a good man, a fair lawman, a loving husband and father." Thomas gazed at his wife, marveling at how she could still take his breath away after all these years. "None of it would have happened without you, you know. You gave me a reason to be better, to build something real." "We built it together," she corrected gently. "And we'll keep building it day by day." As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, Thomas pulled Delilah into a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their first, yet deepened by years of shared joys and sorrows, challenges overcome together, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. Later that night, as they rode back to town beneath a canopy of stars, Thomas looked over at his wife, her profile illuminated by the moonlight, and felt the same rush of gratitude that had become his constant companion these past 5 years. Every day, he thanked whatever twist of fate had led him to Silver Creek, to this woman who had changed his life with nothing more than the quiet strength in her eyes and a smile that had become his true north. In a life once defined by running and reinvention, Thomas Garrett had found his constants: the love of a good woman, the joy of their children, and the peace that comes from finally, truly coming home. And though every girl in town had once wanted his smile, Thomas knew he'd saved his heart for the only woman who had ever seen past the legend to the man beneath and loved him anyway. As Silver Creek grew and prospered, so did the Garrett family. James and Elizabeth were joined by another brother, Samuel, 3 years after their anniversary picnic. The mercantile expanded to include a second story with a dedicated space for books and school supplies that became Delilah's special project. Thomas was indeed elected sheriff when Collins retired, bringing his unique perspective and compassion to the role. Visitors to Silver Creek often remarked on the handsome sheriff and his beautiful wife, noting the way his eyes followed her whenever she entered a room, the way his smile changed when it was directed at her softer, more intimate, as if they shared a secret the rest of the world would never know. And in a way, they did. For only Thomas and Delilah understood the full measure of what they'd found in each other, a love born in danger, tested by adversity, and strengthened by the passage of time. A love that had begun with a glance across a dusty street and blossomed into a lifetime of shared dreams. Every spring, On the anniversary of the day Thomas had first ridden into town, they would close the store early and take their children to the spot where he'd proposed. As the little ones played among the wildflowers, Thomas would pull Delilah into his arms and whisper the same words he'd spoken on their wedding day. "You are my home, Delilah Garrett. Yesterday, today, and all my tomorrows." And Delilah, her heart still fluttering at his touch after all these years, would rise on her toes to kiss her cowboy, secure in the knowledge that of all the smiles he'd given in his life, the ones he saved for her alone were the truest reflection of the man she'd come to love with every fiber of her being. In Silver Creek, their story became something of a legend, the tale of the cowboy whose smile had captured the hearts of every woman in town, but who had eyes only for the quiet shopkeeper who hadn't joined the chase. It was a story told to young girls dreaming of romance, a reminder that true love often comes when and where you least expect it. And for Thomas and Delilah Garrett, it was simply the beginning of a life built on trust, respect, and a love that continued to deepen with each passing year, a testament to the power of that first soft glance and all the ones that followed.